On the night of December 20th, 1968, in the quiet town of Benicia, California, the world would change forever. The evening was still, the air crisp, and the sky clear, illuminated by a scattering of stars. For Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, a 16 and 17-year-old couple, this was supposed to be a moment of peaceful youth. They were parked in their car on a desolate road, simply enjoying each other's company. The night was theirs to share, carefree and free from any worries. But it wasn't an ordinary night. It was the night the Zodiac Killer would make his first move. In the darkness of that quiet night, a figure approached the car. The killer was methodical, calculating, and cold in his actions. With no warning, he pulled out a .22 caliber handgun and shot David Faraday in the head, killing him instantly. Betty Lou, sitting beside him, barely had time to scream before she too was struck down. The killer did not linger. He didn't savor his actions, nor did he take joy in the agony of his victims. He simply executed his plan with ruthless efficiency. And then, like a shadow, he vanished into the night. By the time the police arrived, there were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints, no trace of the killer. Nothing. The victims were left without an explanation, their lives taken for no apparent reason. The crime scene was eerily clean, and the police had nothing to go on except the fear that now gripped the small town. There was no evidence, no motive, just the cold, violent death of two teenagers. The police couldn't find any connections to any known criminal activity. There was no way to explain why they were killed. It appeared as though they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, chosen for reasons beyond understanding. Weeks passed, and the case went cold. The residents of Benicia tried to move on, to find comfort in the normalcy of their lives. But in the background, there was something far more terrifying building. The killer had already made his move, but he wasn't done. Not yet. On July 4th, 1969, just 6 months later, the killer returned, this time in Vallejo, California. The Zodiac Killer had made his presence known. His target this time was Darlene Ferrin, a 22-year-old woman, and Michael Mageau, her 19-year-old companion. They were parked in a quiet, isolated area known as Blue Rock Springs Park, a popular spot for couples. It was a summer evening, peaceful, calm, and seemingly safe. But for Darlene and Michael, their night of peaceful seclusion would soon be shattered. The Zodiac stalked them from the shadows, his presence unknown to the unsuspecting pair. And then, with the precision of a predator, he made his move. Without warning, he approached their vehicle and fired. The gunshots were loud, deafening in the quiet night. Darlene Ferrin was struck and died instantly, her life cut short without any chance to fight back. Michael Mageau, though gravely wounded, somehow survived, but was left to face the aftermath alone. The killer wasn't finished. He didn't shoot once and flee. No, Zodiac fired multiple rounds, a deliberate act of cruelty. He made sure Michael was left to bleed, to face the agony of his wounds. But for reasons unknown, he didn't kill him. Michael lay there, barely able to speak, his life hanging by a thread. The killer, like a shadow, vanished once again, leaving behind only chaos and death. By the time the police arrived, Michael was still alive, his account of the events being the only real lead they had. He described the killer, a man of medium height, dark hair, and a large build. But that description, while useful, was still incomplete. It was not enough to identify the Zodiac. It was just another piece of a puzzle that continued to defy anyone's ability to solve it. Michael Mageau, while lucky to be alive, was left with the haunting memory of the killer's face, but no way to truly connect that image to a name, a life, or a motive. The killer had already gotten away. Again. But this time, something was different. Michael had survived, and he was alive to testify. The question now was, who would believe him? Would anyone ever catch the Zodiac? The investigation began in earnest. This wasn't just an isolated crime anymore. The pattern was clear. The Zodiac Killer was not acting on impulse. He wasn't just a random, chaotic murderer. No, he was something far more calculated. He was playing a game, a sick, twisted game with everyone around him, and with each kill, each letter, each code he sent, he was watching, waiting. He was always one step ahead. Zodiac wasn't done with his games. He wasn't going to disappear into the shadows and be forgotten. Instead, he began to reach out. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the public's attention, and he would do so by sending his first letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. A letter that would shake the very foundations of law enforcement. The letter wasn't just a confession. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of the murders. It was a challenge, a taunt to the police, to the public, and to anyone brave enough to try and catch him. Zodiac referred to himself as the Zodiac, a name that would go down in history, a name that would come to represent a shadow that haunted the minds of millions. His first letter included disturbing statements about his enjoyment of killing, and the most chilling of all, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." In that first letter, Zodiac also included a cipher, a cryptic code that would taunt police and public alike, daring them to solve it. He wasn't just asking for attention, he was demanding it, and he wanted to play. And so began the twisted, sickening game that Zodiac would continue to play for years. Each letter he sent, each cipher he created, was part of his strategy, part of his manipulation. His goal wasn't just to kill, it was to make everyone fear him, to make them obsess over him. He wanted to be untraceable, but more than that, he wanted to be admired. He didn't just want his killings to be remembered, he wanted to control the narrative. And with every letter he sent, every cipher that went unsolved, he became more powerful in the eyes of the world. And the world? The world was captivated. Every time Zodiac sent a new letter, every time a new cipher was uncovered, people played along. They couldn't help it. Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a master of mind games, a master manipulator. The Zodiac Killer was not finished. In fact, he had just begun. His first murder had left a mark, a chilling reminder of what he was capable of. But it was July 4th, 1969, when he would solidify his place in criminal history with his next act of terror. His next set of victims, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, became the second chapter in his dark saga. On that summer night, in the calm and serene Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, Darlene and Michael were enjoying an evening together. It should have been just another quiet summer night, but instead, it was about to become a scene of brutality that would shake the town to its core. The two were parked in a secluded spot, talking quietly, unaware that their lives were about to be shattered. It was a night that seemed peaceful, but the Zodiac was watching from the shadows, just like the hunter he was. Without warning, the killer approached their car. The silence of the night was broken by the shocking sound of gunfire. 3 shots rang out into the darkness, piercing the stillness of the evening air. Darlene Ferrin was hit immediately, her body lifeless before she even had a chance to understand what was happening. Michael Mageau, her companion, was severely wounded, his body ravaged by the barrage of bullets. but somehow he survived. His blood, still warm, stained the ground beneath him as he lay there, barely clinging to life, while the killer continued his cruel task. The Zodiac's next move wasn't to finish Michael. No, he wasn't done yet. The killer stood there for a moment, observing his work, before walking away into the night. Michael, barely conscious and barely alive, was left to deal with the aftermath. He lay there, helpless and struggling to breathe, his heart racing in fear. He would survive, but his survival would come at a cost. The memory of that night would haunt him forever. When the police arrived, it was too late to save Darlene Ferrin. The crime scene was chilling in its clarity. No struggle, no warning, just a methodical execution. Michael Mageau, though gravely injured, was the key to unlocking the mystery of the Zodiac Killer. His description of the killer was chilling in its simplicity. The man was of medium height, possibly around 5'8", and his appearance was somewhat unremarkable, making him blend in easily with the crowd. But what stuck out most to Michael was the killer's sheer calmness, a cold, calculated nature that seemed to drive him to act with no remorse, no hesitation. The police, now with a description and a witness, thought they were closer to solving the mystery. They worked tirelessly to follow every lead, analyze every clue. But despite Michael's testimony, there was still no direct evidence tying anyone to the crime. The Zodiac had done his work with such precision that it seemed impossible for the authorities to close in on him. At the same time, the killer's games had just begun. Zodiac wasn't finished. He wasn't satisfied with simply killing. His thirst for control, his desire to remain in the public eye, led him to send a series of letters to newspapers, taunting the police, challenging the public to solve his cryptic ciphers. The first was sent just days after the murder of Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, and it was only the beginning of the terrifying game he had started. The first of these letters arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It wasn't just a letter. It was a taunt, a warning, and a challenge all wrapped into one. Zodiac referred to himself as the Zodiac, a name that would come to define not only his reign of terror, but also the endless mystery that surrounded him. His words were chilling, almost as if he were writing to his victims from the grave, mocking everyone who dared to chase him. "I like killing people because it is so much fun," Zodiac wrote. The words were casual, chilling in their detachment. It was as though the Zodiac was proud of his actions, as if he reveled in the fear and chaos he had caused. But more than that, the letter contained something far more disturbing, a cipher, a code, a puzzle that the police and the public would spend years trying to solve. The first cipher was made up of a series of strange symbols and numbers, and it seemed impossible to crack. Yet Zodiac made it clear, "I will not give up until I have killed 12 people." He wrote of his desire for fame, of his need to be recognized, and of his love for the power that came with taking lives. The letter wasn't just a confession, it was a challenge, a declaration that Zodiac was not only a killer, but a manipulator. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted to be admired. He wanted the public, the media, and the police to fear him. And in that moment, he succeeded. With the cipher came a message, one that would haunt the authorities for decades. The Zodiac had just begun his psychological game, and he was ready for the world to play along. What followed the letter was a terrifying escalation. Zodiac sent more letters, more ciphers, more taunts, each one more cryptic than the last, each one leaving the police and the public in a state of constant unease. The ciphers were uncrackable, or so it seemed. Zodiac seemed to take pleasure in watching the world struggle to make sense of his riddles. As the days passed, the mystery only deepened, and Zodiac became more bold. In one of his letters, he made it clear that he would not stop until he had gained the attention he sought, until he was immortalized in the public's consciousness. He wanted the world to know that he was more than just a murderer. He was a genius, a man who could not be caught, a man who could elude every attempt to stop him. His letters became famous. The press, the police, and the public couldn't look away. Zodiac's control over the investigation and the media was complete. He was the puppet master, and everyone else was simply following his lead. But even as the fear mounted, Zodiac continued to kill. The question was no longer just who he was. The question was, who would be next? As the investigation into Zodiac deepened, the police began to realize just how elusive he truly was. No evidence was left at the scenes. No fingerprints. No solid leads. It was as if the Zodiac was a phantom, slipping through the cracks of the investigation with each passing year. And even more disturbing than the murders themselves was Zodiac's need for attention. The letters he sent became a central part of the case, leading detectives and journalists alike down paths they would never have considered. Each letter was a game, and Zodiac was in complete control. With every cipher solved, with every letter sent, the Zodiac became more legendary. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was part of the cultural fabric, a figure so elusive that his name would echo in the minds of every investigator, every detective, every member of the public who feared what he might do next. And as Zodiac continued to write his letters, he remained untouchable. He was a master of deception, a puppet master, and the world was his stage. As the years passed and the bodies piled up, the mystery of Zodiac became more than just an investigation. It became a legend, a puzzle with pieces that never quite fit together, no matter how hard anyone tried to solve it. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer, he was a ghost, a figure who haunted the streets of California, slipping away just as easily as he struck. By now, the case had become something of a dark obsession. Detectives, journalists, even armchair sleuths across the country began to speculate. Who was this man? What drove him to kill? What made him so elusive? The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer. He was the one who got away. As time went on, suspects began to emerge, each one more bizarre than the last. But despite their efforts, no one had a definitive answer. The truth, it seemed, was always just beyond their grasp. One of the most widely discussed suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester. Allen seemed to fit the profile of Zodiac in many ways. He lived near the areas where Zodiac had committed his crimes. He was described as a big man, perhaps the same build the witnesses had described. He even seemed to have an eerie interest in the killings, at one point even casually talking about the murders. For years, the police believed Allen might be Zodiac. They had their reasons. He was an odd character, an unpredictable figure, someone who seemed like he could easily fit the image of a killer. But there were problems with this theory. First and foremost, there was no physical evidence linking Allen to the murders. Despite the suspicions, there were no fingerprints, no hair samples, no DNA found at the crime scenes that could tie him to the killings. And when the authorities searched his house, they found no concrete proof. Just the same bizarre behavior that was common in a person like Allen. Nothing that could point to him being Zodiac. But Allen's story didn't end there. He died in 1992, but before his death, many people still believed that he was Zodiac. Was this a case of a guilty man slipping through the cracks? Or was it just another misplaced lead in the endless maze of suspects that filled this case? But Arthur Lee Allen wasn't the only name that emerged from the shadows. As the years went on, other names came to the forefront, names that would make you question everything. One of these names was Gary Francis Post. Post had a criminal history as well. He had served time for other violent crimes, and like Allen, some of his characteristics seemed to fit the profile of Zodiac. But this theory didn't hold as much weight initially until 2021, when a group of amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts revisited the case. They looked deeper into Post's history, analyzed old photographs, and reviewed evidence. They even connected Post's violent behavior and possible ties to certain locations where Zodiac had been active. The evidence wasn't conclusive, but for a time, many speculated that Post could be the elusive killer everyone had been searching for. However, as with Allen, the lack of physical evidence made it difficult to prove anything with certainty. Zodiac was slippery, and even with modern technology and sophisticated forensic methods, the case remained cold. Posty had died in 2018, but the mystery still lingered. Could this man have been the killer? Or was he just another name added to the list of suspects who would never be truly connected to the crimes? And then there's the possibility that the Zodiac Killer was never identified, because he was never meant to be caught. Perhaps Zodiac wasn't just one person. Maybe he was a figure constructed by time, by the fear he instilled, by the mystery he left behind. Was Zodiac the product of a society obsessed with answers, always searching for closure, but never receiving it? Zodiac's very identity became part of the puzzle, a key element in the myth that formed around him. He wasn't just a man. He was an idea, a symbol of evil, of chaos. Maybe Zodiac wanted us to focus on the search for him, not the man behind the mask. After all, if Zodiac had wanted to be caught, he would have left behind something more concrete, something more tangible. In the end, the idea that Zodiac was unidentifiable might be his greatest triumph. He became larger than life, a ghost, a figure of darkness that would never be pinned down. Even the detectives, the experts, the hundreds of thousands of people obsessed with the case could never find him. Perhaps Zodiac wasn't meant to be found. Perhaps the search for Zodiac was never about solving the case, but about keeping the mystery alive. Years passed, and the question remained: who was Zodiac Killer? Each suspect, each theory, and each new piece of evidence left us with more questions than answers. For every lead that seemed promising, there was always a new obstacle that would push the investigation further into the fog of uncertainty. Could Zodiac ever be identified? Could someone like him truly be found? Or had he become a legend, too elusive for anyone to catch? Some believed the Zodiac Killer was dead, living out his life in obscurity, far away from the spotlight he had once craved. Others still held on to the hope that he was alive, and that someday, perhaps in their lifetime, he would be caught. But no matter how much time passed, no one could definitively solve the puzzle. Was Zodiac just another ghost, vanishing into the shadows? Or was he still among us? As investigators continued to dig deeper into the Zodiac Killer case, one thing became increasingly clear. Zodiac wasn't just a murderer. He was a manipulator, a psychological predator who thrived on the fear, confusion, and chaos he caused. The more he killed, the more power he seemed to gain. Zodiac was no ordinary killer. He wasn't driven by impulse or rage. His motivations went beyond simple bloodlust. The question that kept nagging at the minds of investigators and the public alike was, What made him kill? Was it the thrill of the act itself? Was it a deeper need for control? Or was it something more complex? Something rooted in the very fabric of his psyche? To understand Zodiac, one needed to understand the mind behind the killer. Zodiac's killings were cold and calculated. He didn't shoot randomly. Each murder seemed meticulously planned. Every victim chosen carefully, each location selected with precision. There was nothing chaotic or erratic about his method. Zodiac wasn't in a frenzy when he killed. No, he was like an artist crafting his masterpiece, executing each act of violence with calmness and deliberation. Zodiac's need for control was apparent from the very beginning. He wasn't just a killer who wanted to escape detection. He was a mastermind, a puppeteer pulling the strings, controlling the narrative, making the police dance to his tune. Each letter, each cipher he sent, was a calculated move, a game, a challenge that was meant to assert his dominance over the authorities. Zodiac wasn't interested in just evading capture. He wanted everyone to know his name. He wanted to relish in the fear he instilled in others. Each letter he sent wasn't just a confession. It was a taunt, a mockery of the police, a show of superiority. He made it clear that no matter how much they tried, no matter how many hours they spent investigating, they would never catch him. The sheer arrogance in his words was unsettling. It was as if he didn't see his killings as crimes, but as performances. He wasn't simply committing murder. He was putting on a show, with himself as the star. He was the one in control, and he was determined to ensure that the world saw him for what he was, a genius who could outwit anyone. But what motivated Zodiac to need that control? Why was it so important for him to dominate the police, the media, and the public? Was it simply about power, or was there something more, something darker at play? Some psychologists believe that Zodiac's need for control might have stemmed from a deep-rooted psychological trauma. Perhaps his need to control others, to instill fear and confusion, came from a place of intense personal pain. Maybe Zodiac wasn't born with the ability to simply take lives. Perhaps he was shaped by a past filled with trauma, neglect, or abuse. Could his killings have been his way of taking control over a world that had once made him feel powerless? But this is where the mystery grows even more complex. Zodiac's behavior didn't fit into the typical mold of a psychopath. His killings weren't driven by mental illness alone. If that were the case, there would be more chaotic behavior, more random violence. But Zodiac's murders were deliberate, calculated, and consistent. This wasn't the work of someone who simply killed for impulse. No, Zodiac had a plan. He had a mission. What if Zodiac's killings weren't just about control, but about reclaiming something? What if he saw the world as a place where he had been wronged, abandoned, or forgotten, and murder became his way of reclaiming his power? What if his need to kill was connected to a deeper sense of revenge, a vindication he sought, not for any specific wrong done to him, but as a way of asserting his dominance over a world he perceived as having no place for him? Could it be that Zodiac's killings were his way of healing some profound wound from his past? A way of dealing with the sense of powerlessness he had carried with him for so long? It's possible. His taunts, his games, the cryptic letters, all of it might have been his way of making the world acknowledge him, to force others to see his brilliance, his power, and his control. The police weren't just after a killer. They were chasing a shadow, a man who wanted to be seen, a man who wanted to become legend. Zodiac wasn't merely committing murder for the sake of violence. He was committing murder to create a legacy, one that would echo through history. Zodiac's mind was a maze, a twisted combination of need for control, psychological trauma, and a desire for recognition. His crimes weren't just about the death of his victims. They were about the imprint he wanted to leave on the world. With each life he took, he marked the world with his signature, his challenge. The letters were his way of keeping the game alive. The ciphers were his puzzle, his test of intellectual superiority. And the murders, they were his message to the world. I am here. I am untouchable, and I will make you chase me until the end of time. But was Zodiac just a manipulator? Or was he a product of his own history, a dark reflection of society's failings, turned inward on himself? Perhaps, like all true criminals, his need for control came from a place of deep hurt. Was he born a killer? Or was he created by the very world he sought to control? As the years have passed, the Zodiac Killer case has become an almost mythological story. One of those mysteries that lives on, haunting the collective memory of a generation. The names of his victims are etched in history, the ciphers still unsolved, the letters still chilling in their simplicity. Zodiac is no longer just a killer. He is a legend, a figure shrouded in mystery. But as time goes on, one question remains unanswered. Who was Zodiac? Some say he's dead. Some believe he's still out there, watching, waiting, perhaps living a quiet life in the shadows. And others wonder if Zodiac was never meant to be caught, if he was designed to be a ghost, an enigma that would forever evade those who sought him. The investigation into the Zodiac killings has been one of the most frustrating and confounding cases in criminal history. There are suspects, theories, and potential leads, but nothing substantial. No clear answers. It's as though Zodiac was never meant to be found. His legacy, his mystery, is what he left behind. What's more unsettling is that the game that Zodiac started is still being played. His letters, his ciphers, his cryptic messages, they have become more than just clues. They've become part of the mythology. The mystery has outlived him, growing larger than the man ever was. In a way, Zodiac succeeded. He became bigger than himself. He became a symbol of the unknown, a face of fear that nobody could ever catch. And as the decades passed, Zodiac remained a specter in the background of every murder case, every cryptic letter, every unresolved mystery. No one was able to capture him. And perhaps that's the point. Zodiac didn't just want to kill people. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to make sure that his name would never fade into obscurity. And it hasn't. His game was never just about the killings. It was about legacy. The taunting letters, the cryptic codes, they were all part of a larger narrative that would echo long after he was gone. Zodiac wasn't just a man. He was a force. A game that was never meant to be solved, never meant to be finished. As of today, no one can say with certainty who the Zodiac Killer was. We have suspects, we have theories. But the truth remains as elusive as ever. The search for his identity has become almost mythical, like the search for a ghost, for something untouchable. Zodiac remains a symbol of fear and frustration, but also of something far deeper, a question of the unknown. A reminder that sometimes there are mysteries in this world that may never be solved. Sometimes the things we fear are not just evil actions, but questions without answers. But what if Zodiac was still out there? What if, after all this time, he's living among us, watching as people continue to speculate about his identity? What if the killer has simply slipped into the shadows once more, waiting for the day when he'll emerge again, when the world is ready for the next chapter? in the end, it doesn't matter who Zodiac really was. He has won, in a way. His legacy is immortalized in the chaos and fear he created. His mystery is what makes him who he is. And perhaps the most terrifying thing about all of this is the realization that, in some way, Zodiac will never be forgotten. His story, his enigma, will continue to live on, passed from one generation to the next, like the ghost of a killer who never left. So what do we do now? Do we simply accept that the Zodiac Killer will remain a shadow forever? Do we come to terms with the idea that some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved? Or do we keep searching, keep questioning, keep fighting to uncover the truth, no matter how elusive it remains? One thing is certain: Zodiac is no longer just a name or a person. He is a symbol, a mystery that transcends time, that lives on in the cracks of our reality. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the most chilling thing of all. Zodiac is a ghost who will never truly be caught, and the game will never truly end.